Welcome, everyone, to the Preschool Neuroscience Summit. Today, I'm really excited to introduce you to Kerry Perandis. She is coming to us from Kiev today. I have known Kerry for many, many years. She is just an amazing early years practitioner and leader. She's worked for over 35 years in so many different countries and settings. And I knew her from her work in the UAE. She was actually my daughter's preschool teacher. And then she did a lot of work with us in the education reform, coming to presenting at our conferences and things. And I've seen her present in Hong Kong. So she's really a very, very international early childhood person. And she's really one of the best teachers that I've seen. She really knows what is needed in the field of early childhood education. She's so creative and innovative and has so many great ideas for creative and linguistic development, setting up learning environments, emergent curriculum. And she's just a great person to come on and share with us today. So I'm really happy that she's here. So welcome, Kerry, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for the invitation. That was a very lengthy introduction. I don't know if I can live up to that.
No, when I think of things, the first person I think of is Kerry. What would Kerry do? So we will have Kerry's LinkedIn profile, her website. She's also got an animated phonics reader series that she has given us for free, so you can check that out. And today she's going to be talking about developing a democratic mainstream classroom. So Kerry, tell us first of all what that means for people who are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, sure. I think what we need to start with is understanding that what we're doing in teaching is we're kind of failing to teach children their human condition, their tendencies, their natural human tendencies. That seems to get sort of swept under the carpet of curriculum. And within that, even though we're trying to sort of really enforce some type of understanding for self-regulation and emotional intelligence, we're not teaching children how to identify their own human tendencies. And I think this is where the real conflict happens.
Right, yeah. So true. There's so much to do, isn't there? And it's so easy to kind of miss the point.
Yeah, and it's not teachers' fault.
No,
because they are governed by a set of restrictions that are out of their control. But I think, and I know from experience, you can shift that status quo. You can change the paradigm for yourself, which changes it for the children and the school, and eventually for other places as well. So it can be done. It's not easy, but it can be done.
Yeah, awesome. So tell us, what is the starting point really if you're kind of working in a school, you're like not feeling that everything is how you think it should be? How can we adapt practices?
Okay, the starting point, the starting point is more to do with the thinking, the teacher's thinking than anything else. Rather than going in there and just making an environment look great, it has to start with the hard questions. And it's uncomfortable to think about the hard questions sometimes. And it's imperative, I think, that we sit with a lot of discomfort in the process of change. Now, I am going to kind of list a few of the examples for a starting point, but this is not an exhaustive list at all, obviously. This is just things that I've come across in the few years that I've been really engaged with this sort of stuff. And there is a lot of confusion about what it means, I think, to act democratically in a classroom, and it should be confusing. Okay, when teachers start to examine the impact, the purpose, the relationship, and the influences of a whole range of things, then it gets uncomfortable to think about because we feel guilty. We feel like we haven't done the right thing. But starting off at that uncomfortable stage is the first step. So you have to kind of go inward, be that self-reflective person like we would expect children to be, and get uncomfortable with our choices that we might have made in the past. Think like addressing stuff like the emotional intelligence and how unrealistic some of the expectations that we are putting on younger children in order to conform to the rigid scheduling of schools. That's, a really important part of starting the process of change within your own practices. School ownership, you have to look at that aspect, especially those who might enforce academic expectations without consulting the departments that those decisions and choices affect. You kind of have to get into the state where you are an advocate, and you have to make intelligent conversations with these people so that they can, step back from doing these things. Often not. It's the school owners that do this type of thing are quite unaware. They don't know that they're doing the wrong thing, and they quite like knowing that there is an alternative for them. And, you end up working in partnership rather than against them. So it is important to go into that sort of state where you are consulting with people who are making decisions based on whatever it is that they need to cover, so that you're giving them a perspective of what the children need. Things like you have to address, things that often schools, and I'm coming from an international school setting, things like IPC, PYP, and the British National Curriculum. Those have been the curriculums that I've worked with while overseas. And having to address things like inappropriate or misapplied phonics, it's a huge one. You have to address that. Someone has to take the lead in amending those practices, and especially those ones that might rely on task-driven activities, or just the fact that the children are too young for it. I've seen phonics applied in classrooms with children as young as 2 years old. It's just quite prevalent, really. And so, so you have to address that sort of stuff. Obviously, things like timetables, especially those that might be identical to primary type timetables, where you've got these small blocks of time that still have the subject matter in them, the subject content in them, maths, science here, and 9 o'clock English, all that sort of stuff. You have to readdress how the timetable works and really be an advocate for the early years department you're working in, so that you can completely dissect the timetable and remove the early years section from the primary or the rest of the school. Even if you're in the same building, under the same roof, you have to find a way of completely removing the early years so that you can be completely autonomous with everything from the planning cycle to everything else you do in a school-based setting. Suppressing in relationships. Often schools have a blanket ban where you just don't go into someone else's classroom, or children don't mix. You have to address migration. Migration is a huge part of children's emotional development. They need to have these networks, not just within your square walls. They have to be able to address and to mix with adults and children in, external parts of the school as well. So you have to address migration. And that might even be a longer term goal. I know in one school I was at, there's the owners and I got quite friendly, and they were very happy to invest a lot of money into the early years department. So we were able to really redesign the whole interior space so that the huge sliding doors which were always kept open, allowed for this natural migration to occur. These things might have some sort of fiscal element to them, but they're not impossible. And there are ways around it, even if you don't have the money or the support of the school's financial budget to make changes happen. You've got your cohort teachers. You need to have these discussions and conversations quite early on and often, so that you can ensure that migration happens. So that's another one you need to be aware of. Requirements for EAL or ILN, children who have specific needs. Often the practices overseas are that these children are still often taken out of the classroom, working one-on-one with somebody else, and that person might not have an early years background or might not have an understanding for the value of play, really synergetic play, so that they're taken away to these spaces, often on their own. And the work that they're doing with the children is often very targeted or pinned to the curriculum outcomes of whatever curriculum that they're working with. And of course, this drives the data up, and that looks great, but it's not helping the children at all. It's certainly not a democratic action So yeah, making sure that you have these conversations with specialists and school leadership, so that if there is a need for specialist people to come into the classroom, that they're working alongside the children in the classroom and not outside relevance to what's happening in the classroom. So yeah, you have to have conversations basically all the time to really drive the idea home that your kids, these guys, do not need to be, attending primary school or sitting on your agenda. You have to be the advocate for the needs and the requirements for time and space and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
There's so many things, all the way from stuff, assessments, and even school uniforms. I mean, everything in between, autocratic planning documents. Oh my goodness, there's so many things that have to be addressed. And in order to start that sort of first step towards being truly democratic in your classroom, you have to make a list, basically, a nice long list, and start attacking each of those things in their order of ease more than importance, because sometimes if you start to chop down on the list and you get to a roadblock, it's easy enough to go, oh, too hard. Okay, so you start with the small things and you'll see a bit of a progression happening, but there are so many things, and it's literally everything about teaching and classroom experience, unfortunately.
Yeah, I love that, Kerry, and especially starting with small things that you can do easily, and a lot of times, it's about starting the conversations, and sometimes people are doing things with good intent, they just don't realize, oh, really, that's not how it works.
Yeah, and it's not until you start chopping away at it that you see a little pattern, and and you start to find new things that need to change. And it's not easy being the advocate. It's a hard job.
Definitely early childhood needs advocates. So Kerry, tell us a little bit about how democratic is letting children or allowing some freedoms. We know that a lot of environments are very kind of ordered.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we hear, I let the children, or I allow my children, and all this. We hear that, and it's not that the teachers aren't trying to be democratic, but what they're allowing or letting them do is basically within the realm of what is comfortable or appropriate to me. It's whether it doesn't interfere with my agenda. And I think that, to be honest, when you go through a list of things that need looking at, you'll find that the role of your teaching role, or your assistant teacher's role, and even the role of children has to be in that list somewhere. You have to redefine those roles and alter what those roles might mean. And the idea of letting children do things is great. That's a first step, I guess. But we have to be very mindful that we're not tokenistically letting and allowing certain things and not others. And still to this day, I've seen in classrooms, children aren't able to take resources from one space to another space because it doesn't belong there, So you have to redefine all of these boundaries that we've put in place. And there's a hierarchy that has to be addressed. If you're a teacher in an early years classroom and you have a desk, I hate to say it, but you're guilty of enforcing some sort of hierarchy that you might not even know you're doing. But one of the first things that go in any school I work in is get those out. We do not need those teachers' desks, And once you start to deconstruct your role as the teacher and things that you find important and things that you normally do, this pattern of reliability that you're so comfortable doing, you find that you start to interact with children in a different way. When you're sat down at the table next to children doing something of your work, and they're querying you what you're doing, you're having conversations with them and you're deconstructing what it is that you're doing as important work. Now, hopefully that includes the input from the children, so that whatever you're doing has the children's voice in it, but that's another step. I think first step, get rid of that teacher's desk. It's just not necessary. You might hold a few pens and keep the computer, but it's certainly not, I think, important in the classroom, and certain children do see it as the teacher's desk, and it does denote some sort of hierarchy and importance, which really doesn't belong in any democratic space.
Yeah, I love that. And showing the children what work you're doing and
Yeah,
explaining it to
yeah.
them, I think is.
Your workbooks and whatever you plan on, or all that should have all their drawings and scribbles all over it, and their little annotated inputs. Absolutely.
So, Kerry, what about, I know you've worked all over the world, I've worked all over the world. What about restrictions kind of in physical settings? How can we manage that type of thing when we're setting up the classroom?
Yeah, that's a hard one because we come into often in international settings, we inherit the spaces, so we don't have a lot of say in it. And as an adult or a teacher, coming into a room and you think, oh, I can't live with that colour, I can't do this, and oh, that furniture. If we're feeling that, imagine what the children must be feeling when we know through research that children's brains are very sensitive to environmental conditions. So yeah, it's huge. I spend a lot of time before I go into any classroom, even if I'm not in the country, I'll ask them to send me photographs, and I'll just have a look at those photographs and start to sort of map out in my mind where I can include things like collaboration and migration, rather than where do I put the easel. There's a different level of thinking that has to happen in the planning stage of the environment, and planning the environment is more important than planning anything else. You have to plan the environment to a T. And of course, that plan doesn't always stay. I actually have some photos. I thought you'd ask me this. I picked out some photos from the last school that I was at. And the photographs were, I'll try and show you on this. This was actually a reception classroom. And when I first walked in, I thought, oh, year 2, okay. It's a reception classroom. And this was a nursery classroom. And and it was great to get an idea of what type of things I was going to have to deal with in terms of furnishings and colours and all that sort of stuff, and what I can remove and what I can lower and what I can just completely get rid of. So with those photographs, I always spend a bit of time and I make a map. I'll do a little drawing of what I want in terms of not just stuff. I think it's really important to explain this. It's not where I'm putting the easel or where I'm putting the tables as such. It's where I'm creating privacy, where I'm creating opportunities for migration and withdrawal and all this stuff that, often gets overlooked in the developing of the classroom thing. And everyone's so busy putting things in, making it look nice and building these lovely displays of stuff, but there's no children there to be the people that are infiltrating what it should be in that space. So it has to, in my mind, and what I find comfortable is creating it quite, not bland because that denotes something else, but certainly not a ready-made classroom. It has to have the children and the adults and the interactions and the experiences in that classroom over time to alter it. Now, I often think of the classroom as like a composition, basically. It's a blank canvas. And the media for that composition are the human beings and the experiences. And so there should be traces of the children rather than adults, which is often the case. You see lovely displays, phonics displays, maths displays, pictures of children eating their lunch or doing, and there's nothing wrong with that in terms of if that's where you are. But there's another way of thinking about space. I think this is more important. And that's what I'm trying to get through, really.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I've seen that in some of the images that you've shown me before of this, the children building up the areas in the classroom and that really emergent curriculum. So let's talk a little bit about curriculum. So what if you're at a school and you're like, you're given the curriculum, how can you kind of work within that to still, listen to the children and follow their interests and please the people that need pleasing? What suggestions do you have? Because many schools work like that.
Yeah. I guess to answer that one, and the idea of curriculum. Now, interestingly enough, if you think about contemporary curriculum, regardless of what it is, whether it's IPC, PYP, the EYLF in Australia, or the EYFS in the UK, they all have their roots in social constructivism. Now, that's a really fascinating fact, you know, and they all steal and take pieces from each other, all the good bits. And so theoretically and philosophically, they're wonderful, but technically there's something missing. Something happens in the technicality part of it. But the idea of this constructivist approach has been the thing. There's been a lacking of support for teachers to really dig down deep into what that means and how to apply the curriculum. Because take, for instance, the EYFS, the British National Curriculum, early years. That tells you what to teach. It gives you the outcomes at certain age or stages or whatever. Their children should be doing this, blah, blah. But it doesn't tell you how. And that's great. That's great if you have a really strong understanding of constructivism and how to be that emergent person and do all that. But most people don't really have that understanding, and it's not their fault. You know, there's a lacking, I think, in the training, and I really believe from experience that this lack of relational and observational training in classrooms, as you need it any day, is a part of the problem. You know, the IPC and the PYP, again, two more constructivist-based curriculums, but they're thematic. And so as soon as you throw that theme in, the average teacher is going to go, right, we're going to learn summer, or we're going to learn this. And it's like, well, how? You know, you've got this wonderful opportunity to be broad and inviting and as open-ended as possible, but you've just created this block by putting a theme in the middle of this lovely idea. So now we're going to focus on the theme, and of course that theme then has all of the outcomes attached to it. So the teacher just tries to go down that path towards the outcomes rather than exploring the humanistic part of the theme itself, whether it's something to do with animals or whatever. It doesn't matter what the theme is, it's a theme, and it really does restrict the thinking patterns. Now, learning to teach, the idea of teaching to me is not about the teaching. We don't learn to teach, we should be learning to think. Just as we want children to learn to think. But we're not learning to think as teachers, we're learning to teach and to deliver and to give strategies along the way to help children learn. We're not giving them the strategies to involve them in their human beingness, where they're learning to think compassionately or empathetically, or even about learning contemplation. I mean, who plans for contemplation? I do, but who else plans for contemplation? There's got to be those sorts of things rather than the curriculum outcomes. But when you get into a place where you get a job at a school and say your curriculum is EYFS, or it doesn't matter what it is, the key to making sure that you can provide a high level of truly integrative, interactive, reciprocal learning is to really understand the curriculum. You have to know it, nuts and bolts. Put it in there and then get rid of it. You don't need it. If you don't know the curriculum to an extent that you need to, you tend to keep relying on referring to it. Oh, I just check what they need to do. You know, you tend to always have to go back to the paper part of it and look at what you need to cover or what you need to provide. But if you have a super duper strong understanding of curriculum, you can get rid of it. You don't need it. You can attach any single thing that happens in a classroom for any children at any time. You can attach it to curriculum outcomes. That's the easy bit. So it becomes quite easy to be a fluid teacher if you have a super strong understanding of the curriculum that you're working with. So there's no easy fix for that one, unfortunately. You just have to know your stuff.
Yeah.
Until you but yeah, once you know it, you can get rid of it. You don't need it after that. You can just, you know, like making a cake. You know what to do. You know how to do it.
Right.
There you go. I'll just add a little extra bit of that. You know, it doesn't matter as long as you know the basics, but know them well, I think. That's the key.
So, Kerry, when For a lot of teachers watching might be thinking like, this all sounds great. I want to do all this, but I don't want to be seen as a troublemaker or a rebel or kind of rocking the boat. So do you have any tips, Kerry, on how we can kind of manage the process without getting into too much?
Yeah, it is a hard one, because especially teachers, for some reason, and it doesn't matter if you're, on the floor as a cohort here or you're in leadership, it doesn't matter where you are. For some reason, teachers have quite a sensitive soul. They don't like to be, they don't like to feel like they're being nitpicked. So with that in mind, you have to kind of attack it in a different way. You've got to, like you would with children, seriously, you treat people like you would normally treat the children, which is just a human way, and be mindful of things like emotions and history. Especially, you might have people in the school who have, incorporated something that they think is really fantastic. But what you need to do is establish yourself. You have to have the information. You don't go into battle unarmed. That would be stupid. That's a suicide mission. No one does that. So you have to be armed and have to have a clear idea and a pathway to what you want in terms of any amendments. Now, at the end of the day, there is an argument that you can always draw on, and nobody in their right mind is going to argue with it. And it's because it's basically everything you're doing and everything you're thinking and everything you want to achieve is for the betterment of children's cognitive futures. Okay, I'm going to argue with that. Like a bit of a heel if you do, but you can, I always bring those sorts of things into the conversations, and you need to know who to have conversations with first. Okay, you need to work out the dynamics of, finding commonality is great. You need to find that sort of a person that you can have as a sounding board and someone to converse with and share ideas with. But at the same time, all while this is happening, and you might see it as more of a long-term venture, you need to be addressing things in the classroom at the grassroots level, and treating the classroom like an exploratory laboratory thing where you can experiment. You've got to come back with some sort of evidence, some credential that you can say, well, I've tried this, and this is whatever. You've got to be doing this sort of simultaneously, and during that process, what you're doing is you're modelling. You're modelling to the people who are observing it, and hopefully you're not, sitting behind your closed doors. You're doing things more openly. But yeah, modelling and doing all that sort of stuff helps to generate the interest. Just like in a classroom where something's happening, someone's got this fantastic idea, all of a sudden everyone's swept up into it in whatever way, in their way. It doesn't have to be the same way, and so you're generating this sort of interest and having these conversations a little bit more easily than you would if you were just barking some orders at them, But yeah, choose your battles wisely. Don't go in unarmed, and practice what you preach.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much, Kerry, for coming on and for sharing all these very practical, important things that we need to think about, and ways that we can shift, whether that's slowly or quickly, but yeah, just start, I think, with what you can,
but if I can just say, there is a huge need for some reform at this stage, and this has been going on for so long. I can't believe it's 2020 and we're still having these same conversations. But like I said before, it's not at the fault of the teachers, but there is a very real sort of conflict that teachers have to deal with every day in their classrooms, and they have to already have these instinctive answers to really complex questions. And so we need to support teachers to have those answers as well through relational and observational training. It's really the only way.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you.
There, but you need to apply it, and that's the hard bit. That's the bit that the teachers aren't getting supported with.
Yeah, more teacher support. We're all for that for sure. And so we will have Kerry's information if you want to get in touch with her, or look at her website and see some examples of things that she's been doing. I know she has some great pictures up there as well. And just want to say thank you, Kerry, for joining us. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing today.
Thank you, Helen. It's great to see you again.
Thanks.